A police dog refuses to let a girl enter her room, and seconds later, everyone understands why. What officers sensed that day wasn't just instinct. It was something far more profound. In the next few minutes, you're going to witness a story of unconditional love, protective instinct, and a bond so powerful that it literally saved a life. This is the moment everything changed. Maya had always been different from other kids. While her friends talked about their favorite celebrities or the latest video games, she talked about Officer, her best friend, her protector, her constant companion. Officer wasn't just any dog. He was a retired police K9, a German shepherd with a career spanning 8 years in law enforcement. He'd worked alongside officers, tracked suspects, detected explosives, and saved lives. But when he came to live with Maya's family 3 years ago, his greatest mission was just beginning. The first day Officer arrived at their home, Maya was 12 years old. She remembers standing in the driveway, nervous, uncertain. This was a working dog, a serious dog with serious training. Would he even notice her? Would he care about a shy girl who spent most of her time reading books and drawing in her sketchpad? But the moment Officer's dark eyes locked onto hers, something shifted. It was like the entire universe condensed into that single moment of connection. Officer walked toward her slowly, deliberately, the way he'd been trained to move. His massive paws pressed against the concrete with purpose. But when he reached Maya, he didn't do what she expected. He didn't sit or wait for commands. Instead, he gently rested his head against her chest, and in that gesture, Maya felt something she'd never felt before. Complete, unconditional acceptance. From that day forward, they were inseparable. Over the next 3 years, Officer became more than a pet. He became Maya's anchor in a world that often felt overwhelming. She was a quiet kid, sometimes too quiet. Teachers worried about her. Her parents wondered if she was okay. But Officer never questioned her silence. He simply understood. When Maya had anxiety attacks in the middle of the night, Officer would sense it before it happened. He'd jump onto her bed, press his warm body against hers, and ground her back to reality. When she felt invisible at school, Officer made her feel like the most important person in the world. His unconditional love was the one thing she could always count on. They had rituals. Every morning before school, Maya would sit on the back porch with Officer's massive head resting on her lap, and they'd watch the sun rise together in complete silence. No words needed. Every afternoon when Maya came home, Officer would be waiting at the door, his tail wagging with such intensity that his entire back half would wiggle. He'd follow her everywhere, to her room, to the kitchen, to the bathroom. Some kids might have found that suffocating. Maya found it comforting. She was never truly alone. Officer had scars on his body from his police work, marks from dangerous situations he'd survived. Maya would trace these scars with her fingers and whisper thank yous for all the lives he'd saved before he came to her. She'd kiss the top of his head and tell him that his real job now was protecting her heart. And he'd accepted that responsibility with the same dedication he'd shown during his years in law enforcement. Officer took his job seriously. The bond between them was the kind that people write songs about, the kind that makes cynical adults believe in magic again. Maya's mother would often watch them together and cry, not from sadness, but from witnessing something so pure, so genuine, that it reminded her why love mattered. Her father would shake his head in amazement at how Officer seemed to anticipate Maya's needs before she even knew she had them. He'd turn to his wife and say, "That dog loves her more than anything in this world." And he was right. Officer's love was fierce, protective, and absolute. He'd proven it 1,000 times in small ways, standing between Maya and strangers, positioning himself between her and the stairs when she was sick, staying awake through her nightmares. But neither Maya nor her family had any idea that his greatest act of love was about to unfold. Neither did they know that this bond, this perfect, beautiful connection they'd all taken for granted, was about to be tested in ways that would change everything. But that evening, everything changed. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September, the kind of day where summer refuses to completely let go, and the air still carries warmth even as the leaves begin their slow transformation. Maya had just gotten home from school, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her mind already drifting toward the homework she'd procrastinate on and the books she'd rather be reading. The house was quiet. Her parents wouldn't be home for another 2 hours. It was just her and Officer, like always. She kicked off her shoes at the door and called out, "Officer, I'm home." Normally, this was his cue. The sound of his nails clicking rapidly against the hardwood floors would echo through the house as he bounded toward her, his entire body vibrating with excitement. But today, something was different. Officer appeared from the living room, slowly, deliberately. His tail wasn't wagging. His ears were alert, positioned forward in a way that Maya had learned meant he was concentrating intently on something. His dark eyes were fixed on her, not with his usual warmth, but with something else, something urgent. "Officer?" Maya set down her backpack and approached him. "What's wrong, boy?" He didn't greet her the way he usually did. Instead, he positioned himself directly in front of her, blocking her path toward the hallway that led to her bedroom. It was a subtle gesture, but unmistakable. Officer had been trained to block and protect. Maya had seen videos of him during his police work days. He'd been used to shield officers from danger, to physically position himself between threats and the people he was protecting. But he'd never done this with her before. "Officer, move," Maya said, confused but not yet concerned. She tried to step around him, but he shifted his massive body, maintaining the barrier. "Come on, boy. I need to go to my room." Officer didn't budge. His jaw was tense. His breathing was steady but deliberate. He was communicating something, and every fiber of his being was focused on one task: keeping Maya away from her bedroom. Maya felt a flutter of confusion in her chest. This wasn't like him. "Officer, what is going on?" She reached down to pet him, to reassure him, but he gently moved away from her touch, something he almost never did. The rejection stung a little. She tried again to move past him, and this time he let out a low, rumbling sound from deep in his throat. Not a growl exactly, but a warning. A plea, a desperate attempt to communicate something she didn't understand. For the first time, Maya felt a small seed of unease plant itself in her mind. Okay, she said, her voice quieter now. "I'll go to the kitchen first." She detoured around Officer and headed toward the kitchen, thinking maybe he was just having an off day. Maybe he was sick. She filled a bowl with water and set it down for him, but he didn't drink. He followed her, maintaining his vigilant position, his eyes never leaving her. Every time she moved toward the hallway, he'd position himself in front of her again. It was like an invisible wall had been erected between Maya and her room, and Officer was the guardian standing firm on the other side. An hour passed. Maya tried everything. She attempted to reason with him, to cajole him, to distract him with treats. Nothing worked. Officer remained steadfast, his protective stance unwavering. She sat on the couch and tried to do her homework, but she couldn't concentrate. Her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, toward her closed bedroom door. What was Officer sensing? What was he trying to tell her? When her parents arrived home at 5:30 p.m., Maya was sitting on the kitchen counter, swinging her legs, her frustration mounting. Officer was still positioned like a sentinel, still blocking the hallway. "Hey, honey," her mother called out, setting down her work bag. "How was school?" "Mom, something's wrong with Officer," Maya said immediately. "He won't let me go to my room. He's been like this for an hour. He's acting really weird." Her parents exchanged a glance. The kind of look that parents give each other when they're not quite sure if their child is overreacting or if something is genuinely amiss. Her father, David, walked over to Officer and knelt down, examining him carefully. "Officer, buddy, you okay?" He ran his hands over the dog's body, checking for injuries, for signs of pain. Officer's muscles were tense, but there were no obvious physical problems. "He seems fine physically." "He's not fine," Maya insisted. "He won't move. He keeps blocking the hallway. Every time I try to go to my room, he gets in front of me. It's like he's protecting me from something." Her mother, Susan, smiled. A gentle, slightly patronizing smile that suggested she thought her daughter might be imagining things. "Dogs can be strange sometimes, sweetie. Maybe he just wants to play, or he's feeling anxious. Why don't you try taking him for a walk? That might help him settle down." But Maya's father was watching Officer more carefully now. He'd worked with police officers before, had attended demonstrations of police dog training. He understood what it meant when a trained protection dog entered this state. His expression shifted from casual to thoughtful. "Actually," David said slowly, "Officer doesn't usually act like this without a reason. Dogs like him, trained dogs, they have instincts that are usually pretty reliable." "David, he's just being a dog," Susan said. But there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice now. Officer suddenly turned his head toward the hallway, his ears perking up even more intensely. Then he looked back at Maya, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. It wasn't aggression. It was fear. It was desperation. It was a plea. But that evening, everything changed even more dramatically than Maya could have possibly imagined. David made a decision. Years of trusting his instincts told him that Officer's behavior wasn't random. A retired police dog didn't block doorways and refused to let his beloved owner enter a room without cause. He walked toward the hallway, his movements deliberate and calm. "David, what are you doing?" Susan asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I'm going to check her room," he said simply. "Officer's been trained to alert on threats. If he's acting like this, there's a reason." Officer didn't stop him. The dog stepped aside, allowing David to pass, but his body remained tense, his muscles coiled like springs ready to release. His eyes tracked David's every movement with laser-focused intensity. It was as if Officer was saying, "Go. See for yourself. Understand what I've been trying to protect her from. Understand the danger that lurks beyond this threshold." Maya watched from the kitchen as her father disappeared down the hallway. The house fell silent except for the sound of her own heartbeat, which suddenly seemed very loud. A rhythmic drumming that echoed in her ears like a warning bell. Officer remained in his protective stance, now positioned between Maya and the hallway, his massive frame a living barrier. His breathing was controlled but deliberate. Each exhale a quiet affirmation of his commitment to her safety. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. The anticipation was suffocating. Maya's mind raced with possibilities. Was someone in her room? Had Officer detected an intruder? Her palms began to sweat. Her throat tightened. She wanted to call out to her father, to ask what he was finding. But something held her back, a primal understanding that she needed to stay where she was, needed to trust officers' judgment. Then they heard it. Her father's voice, sharp and urgent, cutting through the silence like a knife. "Susan, call 911, now!" The command was absolute. The fear in his voice was unmistakable. Everything happened very quickly after that, as if the world had suddenly shifted into fast forward. Her mother's face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks like water from a bathtub. She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, nearly dropping it twice before managing to grip it firmly. Officer pressed closer to Maya, his warm body a solid reassurance against her leg. She didn't understand what was happening, but she understood that Officer had been right. Officer had known. Officer had protected her. Her father emerged from the hallway, his expression grave and etched with concern. He walked directly to Susan and spoke in low, urgent tones that Maya could barely hear. "There's a carbon monoxide detector going off in her room. The alarm's been triggered. We need to get everyone out of the house, now. This is serious, Susan. Very serious." The words didn't fully register at first. Carbon monoxide? Maya had learned about it in science class during a unit on environmental hazards. Something about a colorless, odorless gas that was produced by incomplete combustion. Dangerous, deadly, invisible. But it was abstract, theoretical. Something that happened to other people in other houses. It wasn't real. It wasn't happening in her house. It wasn't happening in the place where she felt safe, where she did her homework, where she read her books late into the night. "Everyone outside," David commanded, already moving toward the front door with urgency. "Leave everything. Just go. Now. Move." Susan was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, her voice trembling as she explained the situation with halting words. "We have a carbon monoxide detector going off. Yes, in our daughter's bedroom. No, we're getting out now. Our address is..." David ushered them all toward the door, Maya, Susan, and Officer. They stepped out into the warm September evening, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across their lawn. The fresh air hit Maya's face like a splash of cold water, shocking her into the reality of the situation. David immediately moved to the side of the house where Maya's bedroom window was located. He could see it now. A small gap in the window frame where it didn't seal completely, and near it, a heating vent that was positioned oddly, as if something had shifted or come loose. The vent's cover was partially dislodged, hanging at an angle that suggested it had been disturbed by time or mechanical failure. Within minutes, emergency vehicles arrived. Fire trucks with their distinctive red paint gleaming in the fading sunlight, ambulances with their pristine white exteriors, police cars with their flashing lights creating a surreal strobe effect across the neighborhood. Firefighters emerged from the trucks in their protective gear, their movements swift and practiced. They carried specialized equipment, detectors and monitors that could measure invisible threats, that could quantify the danger that had been silently accumulating in Maya's room. The firefighters entered the house with the confidence of professionals who had done this 100 times before. They moved methodically through each room, each corner, checking every space with their equipment. The carbon monoxide levels in Maya's bedroom were dangerously high, so high that the firefighters exchanged meaningful glances with each other. The kind of glances that suggested they understood how close this family had come to tragedy. The source was traced to a faulty connection in the heating system that had been slowly leaking carbon monoxide into the house for days, perhaps weeks. It had accumulated in Maya's room because of the way the air circulation worked. because of that small gap in her window frame that prevented proper ventilation, because of 100 tiny factors that had aligned in the worst possible way. The heating system was old, installed when the house was first built 15 years ago. It had been neglected, serviced only sporadically, never thoroughly inspected. No one had thought to check it. No one had known that death had been quietly seeping into their home through invisible channels. But Officer had known. As the firefighters worked and the paramedics checked Maya's vitals, she was fine. Officer had kept her out of the room before any serious damage could occur, before the gas could accumulate in her bloodstream to dangerous levels. Maya stood in the driveway, with her hand resting on Officer's head. She looked up at her father, who was watching the emergency responders with an expression of profound gratitude, mixed with the horror of what could have happened. His face was pale, his eyes slightly unfocused, as if he was mentally replaying a scenario he didn't want to contemplate. "He saved her life," David said quietly, his voice thick with emotion and barely above a whisper. If Officer hadn't blocked that door, if Maya had gone into her room and closed the door like she always does to do homework, if she'd fallen asleep in there tonight like she usually does around 9 p.m., he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the air between them like a dark cloud. Maya would have gone to sleep in a room saturated with carbon monoxide. She would have inhaled the poisonous gas throughout the night, her body slowly succumbing to its effects. By morning, it might have been too late. By morning, she might not have woken up at all. Susan wrapped her arms around Maya, tears streaming down her face in rivulets of relief and terror and gratitude all mixed together. "Thank you," she whispered to Officer, kneeling down and burying her face in his fur. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You saved our daughter. You saved our baby." Officer stood still, accepting their gratitude with the quiet dignity of someone who had simply done what he was trained to do, what his instincts demanded, what his love for Maya compelled him to do. His job wasn't over. His mission to protect her remained absolute and unwavering. Later that evening, after the house had been deemed safe once the heating system was repaired by an emergency technician who worked through the night, after the paramedics had finished their checks and confirmed that no one had been exposed to dangerous levels of the gas, after the emergency vehicles had left and the neighborhood had returned to its normal evening rhythms, the family sat together in the living room. The house felt different now, safer in some ways, but also more fragile, as if they'd been given a glimpse behind the curtain of safety and seen how thin that curtain really was. Maya was on the couch between her parents, with Officer's head resting on her lap. His breathing was calm now, his body finally relaxed. He'd done his job. He'd completed his mission. He'd protected his family. Her father looked at the dog with new eyes, eyes that saw not just a beloved pet, but a guardian angel, a protector, a hero, a being whose existence had transcended the ordinary and entered the realm of the miraculous. "We almost lost her," David said, his voice still shaky with the after effects of adrenaline. "If it wasn't for Officer, if he hadn't sensed something was wrong, if he hadn't had the training and the instinct to block that door." "I know," Susan replied, squeezing Maya's hand tightly, as if reassuring herself that her daughter was still there, still alive, still present. "I don't even want to think about what could have happened." Maya didn't say anything. She simply stroked Officer's head, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing, grateful beyond words for the bond they shared. Officer had sensed danger that humans couldn't perceive. He had acted on instinct and training and love. He had put himself between Maya and harm, not with aggression or violence, but with unwavering protection and steadfast determination. The family sat in silence for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts, each processing what had almost happened and what Officer had prevented. The television played softly in the background, but no one was watching. The only sound that mattered was Officer's gentle breathing, a reminder that he was there, that he was real, that he had saved them all. That night, Officer slept on Maya's bed, something he rarely did, as her parents had always maintained that the couch was his designated sleeping spot. But tonight, his presence felt necessary. Tonight, they both needed to know that the other was safe. Tonight, their bond transcended the ordinary. It had become something sacred, something that had been forged in the crucible of danger and tested in the fires of a life-or-death situation. Maya wrapped her arms around Officer's neck, burying her face in his fur, and whispered words of gratitude that he would never fully understand, but would always feel. Officer's tail thumped softly against the mattress. A quiet acknowledgement, a gentle affirmation of his love for this girl, who had become his entire world. As the night deepened and the house settled into quiet, Maya realized something profound. Officer wasn't just her pet. He wasn't just her companion. He was her protector, her guardian, her hero. And she would spend the rest of her life making sure he knew how much that meant to her. But this was only the beginning of Officer's incredible journey with Maya. The real test of their bond was still to come. A challenge that would push them both to their limits and reveal the true depth of their connection. The weeks following the carbon monoxide incident were transformative for the entire family in ways both profound and subtle. The house underwent a complete and comprehensive inspection and renovation that lasted nearly 3 weeks. Teams of specialists arrived with their equipment and expertise, examining every inch of the structure, every pipe, every vent, every connection point where danger might lurk unseen. The old heating system, a relic from when the house was first built, a system that had been maintained only sporadically over the years, was completely replaced with a modern, efficient unit that included multiple safety sensors and automatic shut-off mechanisms that would activate at the first sign of danger. New carbon monoxide detectors were installed in every room. Not just one, but a comprehensive network of devices that communicated with each other through wireless signals, creating an interconnected web of protection against invisible threats. The family felt safer after the renovations were complete. But they also felt more aware of how fragile safety truly was. How easily disaster could slip through the cracks of complacency and neglect. Maya's relationship with Officer deepened in ways that seemed impossible to quantify or fully express. She had always loved him with the uncomplicated devotion that children reserve for their beloved pets. But now that love was tinged with a profound gratitude that manifested in small, tender gestures throughout each day. She'd wake up in the morning before school and simply sit with him in the pre-dawn darkness, running her fingers through his fur, telling him stories about her dreams, sharing her hopes and fears with him in whispered tones. She'd come home from school and immediately seek him out, needing to feel his presence like a physical anchor to reality, needing that tangible confirmation that he was still there, still alive, still her protector. Her friends noticed the change in her behavior. They'd comment on how attached she seemed to Officer, how she never wanted to leave his side, how she'd frequently excuse herself from social gatherings to check on him or spend time with him. Maya didn't try to explain it to them. Some things couldn't be adequately explained with words. They could only be felt, experienced, understood through the lens of having lived through something extraordinary. 3 months after the incident, on a cold December morning when frost covered the windows and the world seemed to be holding its breath in anticipation of winter's full arrival, Officer began to slow down in ways that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. It started subtly at first, so subtly that only someone who knew Officer as intimately as Maya did would have noticed. The way he moved a little more carefully when climbing the stairs, placing each paw deliberately rather than bounding up them with his usual confidence. The way he'd pause before jumping onto the couch, as if calculating whether his body would cooperate with his intentions. The way he'd rest more frequently during their afternoon walks, stopping to sit in the grass and simply breathe, his sides heaving with the effort of exertion that should have been effortless for a dog of his size and training. She mentioned it to her parents one evening at dinner, her concern evident in her voice and her expression. But they dismissed it as normal aging. Officer was 9 years old now, they reasoned with the logic of adults who had seen many dogs age. He'd had a long and distinguished career in law enforcement before coming to live with them, years of intense physical and mental activity. It was natural for him to slow down a bit, they suggested. It was the inevitable progression of time, nothing to be alarmed about. But Maya knew Officer better than anyone in the world. She could read his moods with the precision of someone fluent in an unspoken language. She could interpret his energy levels by the way his ears moved, by the intensity of his gaze, by the speed and enthusiasm of his tail wag. She could detect his subtle shifts in behavior the way a musician can detect a single off note in an orchestra. Something was different. Something was profoundly, fundamentally wrong. And no amount of parental reassurance could convince her otherwise. It was a Saturday morning in early December when things became impossible to ignore or rationalize away. Maya woke up earlier than usual, around 6 a.m., driven by an instinctive need to check on Officer. She found him in the living room, struggling to stand. His back legs weren't responding the way they should. There was a hesitation, a lag, a disconnect between his brain's commands and his body's ability to execute them. He'd managed to get up eventually, but his movements were stiff, labored, as if every muscle fiber was protesting the effort. His breathing seemed heavier than usual, more labored. When he tried to follow Maya downstairs for breakfast, a ritual they'd maintained since the day he arrived at their home, he had to stop halfway down the staircase, sitting on one of the steps to catch his breath. His sides heaved, his tongue lolled out of his mouth. His eyes, those intelligent dark eyes that had always been so alert and focused, seemed clouded somehow, less sharp, less present. "Mom, Dad, something's wrong with Officer," Maya called out, panic rising in her voice and echoing through the house like an alarm bell. "Something's really wrong." Her parents rushed downstairs, drawn by the urgency in her tone. They found her sitting on the stairs beside Officer, her hand on his back, her face etched with worry. David knelt beside Officer and immediately began a careful examination, running his hands along the dog's spine with practiced movements, checking his legs for signs of injury or swelling, looking deeply into his eyes as if trying to see past the physical symptoms to the underlying cause. Officer's eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes that had always been so alert and focused, so full of purpose and determination, seemed cloudy somehow, less sharp, less responsive. "We need to take him to the vet," David said, his voice grave and tinged with concern. "Today, right now. This can't wait." Susan immediately got on the phone while David carefully helped Officer into the car, supporting his back end to compensate for the weakness in his hind legs. The veterinary clinic, which normally had a wait time of several hours on Saturday mornings, agreed to see them immediately when Susan explained the situation with urgency in her voice. The veterinary clinic was crowded that Saturday morning with the usual collection of pets and their worried owners. Cats in carriers, rabbits in travel cages, a parrot in a large bird cage. Families with anxious expressions. But when Maya explained the situation to the receptionist, describing officers' sudden onset of weakness and difficulty moving, they were taken in immediately, bypassing the waiting room and the usual procedures. The vet, Dr. Patricia Chen, was a woman in her 50s with kind, intelligent eyes and the gentle confidence of someone who had spent her entire professional career caring for animals, who had delivered both joyful news and devastating diagnoses with equal compassion. Dr. Chen examined Officer thoroughly and methodically, checking his reflexes with a small rubber hammer, testing his mobility by asking him to walk across the examination room, checking his vital signs with practiced efficiency. She palpated his spine carefully, feeling for abnormalities, for signs of injury or disease. She looked into his eyes with an ophthalmoscope, checked his ears, listened to his heart and lungs with her stethoscope. She asked detailed questions about his behavior, his eating habits, his energy levels, his bathroom habits, any changes they'd noticed in recent weeks or months. "How long has he been like this?" Dr. Chen asked, her stethoscope pressed against Officer's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Just since this morning," Maya said, her voice small and frightened. "But he's been slowing down for a few weeks. We thought it was just age, you know? We thought it was normal for an older dog." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully, her expression serious but not unkind. "I'd like to run some tests," she said carefully. "Blood work to check for infections, metabolic problems, or other systemic issues. X-rays to examine his spine and joints for arthritis or other degenerative changes. Possibly an MRI if the initial tests don't provide clear answers. There could be several things going on here. Arthritis, which is common in older dogs. Neurological issues, which could range from minor to serious. Or..." She paused, choosing her words with obvious care, aware that she was about to introduce the possibility of something more sinister. Or something more serious that we'll need to investigate further. The word serious hung in the air like a death knell, heavy with implication and dread. Maya felt her stomach drop, felt her chest tighten with anxiety. Officer was her hero. Officer was her protector. Officer was the being who had saved her life by sensing dangers she couldn't perceive. Officer couldn't be sick. Officer couldn't be in danger. That wasn't how this was supposed to work. The universe had already tested their bond once. It couldn't be so cruel as to test it again, could it? The tests took several hours, hours that stretched out like taffy, becoming longer and longer with each passing minute. Maya sat in the waiting room with her parents, unable to focus on anything, unable to distract herself from the anxiety that gnawed at her from the inside. She tried to read a magazine that someone had left on the waiting room table, but the words blurred together into meaningless symbols. She tried to distract herself with her phone, scrolling through social media without actually seeing anything, but she couldn't concentrate. Her mind kept returning to Officer in the back room, surrounded by machines and needles and clinical equipment, being poked and prodded while she sat helplessly in the waiting area, unable to comfort him or advocate for him or do anything except wait. Her father sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his own expression tense with worry. Her mother paced back and forth, checking her watch every few minutes as if the passage of time could be accelerated by monitoring it closely. They all sat in a state of suspended anxiety, waiting for news that they both dreaded and desperately needed to hear. When Dr. Chen finally emerged from the back room, her expression was serious but not unkind. the expression of someone who had delivered difficult diagnoses many times before and had learned to do so with compassion and clarity. She asked them to come into her office, a small, comfortable room with soft lighting designed to create an atmosphere of calm, and a couch that seemed specifically designed for delivering bad news, for providing a place where families could sit together and absorb information that would change their lives. Officer has a degenerative neurological condition, Dr. Chen said, settling into her chair across from them, her hands folded on her desk in a gesture that conveyed both professionalism and compassion. It's called degenerative myelopathy, or DM. It's a progressive disease that affects the spinal cord, causing the nerve fibers within the cord to degenerate over time. It's similar to ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, in humans. You may have heard it referred to as Lou Gehrig's disease. Maya didn't fully understand what that meant in all its implications, but she understood the word progressive. She understood that it meant things would get worse. She understood that it meant Officer's condition would not improve, would not stabilize, but would only deteriorate over time. What does that mean? Susan asked, her voice trembling slightly, her hand finding Maya's and squeezing it gently in a gesture meant to provide comfort to them both. For Officer? What's his prognosis? What can we expect? Dr. Chen took a deep breath. The kind of breath that suggested she was preparing herself to deliver information she knew would be painful to hear. DM typically progresses over months to years, she explained with clinical precision. It starts with weakness in the hind legs, which is what we're seeing now. As the disease progresses, the weakness will spread gradually upward through the body. Eventually, it will affect his ability to walk independently, to control his bowel and bladder functions, and potentially his ability to breathe properly. There is no cure for DM. There are no treatments that can stop the progression of the disease. Though physical therapy, certain supplements, and medications might slow down the progression slightly, might buy some additional time. The words seemed to come from very far away, as if Maya was hearing them through water, through layers of insulation that muffled the impact of their meaning. She felt her father's arm around her shoulders, felt her mother's hand still gripping hers, but it all seemed distant, unreal, as if she was observing the scene from outside her own body. How long does he have? David asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might make the diagnosis more real, more permanent. That varies considerably from dog to dog, Dr. Chen said, her tone gentle but honest. Some dogs progress quickly, within 6 months to a year. Others progress more slowly, and we see them living for 2 years or more after diagnosis. With good care, proper pain management, and a supportive environment, Officer could have anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, maybe longer in some cases. But the quality of life will deteriorate gradually as the disease progresses. Eventually, we'll need to have difficult conversations about quality of life and what's best for him. The last part of that sentence, the implication of what came after quality of life, hung unspoken in the room, understood by everyone present, but too painful to articulate directly. Maya felt tears streaming down her face, though she didn't remember starting to cry. The tears came without warning, without permission, flowing freely as her body processed information that her mind was struggling to accept. There has to be something we can do, she said, her voice breaking on the words, desperation evident in every syllable. There has to be a treatment or a surgery or some kind of experimental procedure. There has to be something. Officer saved my life. He can't just... She couldn't finish the sentence. She couldn't say the word that was lurking at the end of that thought, the word that represented the ultimate outcome of this disease. Dr. Chen's expression softened with genuine sympathy. and her gaze focused directly on Maya with an intensity that suggested she understood the depth of the bond between this girl and this dog. "I wish there was more we could do," she said quietly. "But DM is a degenerative condition of the spinal cord itself. There's no surgical intervention that can help. The disease is progressive and ultimately terminal. The best we can do is manage his comfort, keep him moving and active as much as possible for as long as possible, and provide him with the love and support of his family." The last part seemed to be directed specifically at Maya, as if Dr. Chen was trying to tell her something without saying it directly, something that went beyond the clinical facts and statistics. "What Officer needs now is you. What he needs is your love, your presence, your unwavering support through the difficult days ahead. What he needs is to know that he is not alone, that he is valued, that his life has meant something profound." The drive home was silent. The only sounds were the hum of the car engine and the occasional sigh from Officer, who sat in the back seat with Maya, his head resting on her lap just like it had on that first day when she'd brought him home from the police department months ago. But his breathing was labored now, his movements careful and deliberate. He was trying to be strong for her, Maya realized, with a clarity that cut through her grief. Even as his body was betraying him, even as disease was slowly stealing his mobility and his vitality, Officer was still trying to be the protector, the guardian, the hero. That evening, the family sat together in the living room, the weight of the diagnosis settling over them like a heavy blanket. Officer was on his bed, a large, orthopedic mattress that her parents had immediately purchased online after the vet visit and had it expedited for delivery. Maya sat beside him, her hand resting on his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady, strong, a rhythm that had become her anchor to reality. "We're going to take care of him," David said firmly, his voice carrying the determination of someone who had made a decision and would not be swayed from it. "Whatever he needs, we're going to provide it. Physical therapy to keep his muscles active and strong for as long as possible. Supplements and medications for pain management. Assistive devices if he needs them, ramps, harnesses, whatever helps him maintain his mobility and his dignity. We're going to make sure his remaining time is as comfortable and as full of love as possible." "He saved your life," Susan said to Maya, her own eyes wet with tears, her voice thick with emotion. "Now it's our turn to save him. Or at least, to make sure he knows how much he means to us, how much his life has mattered, how grateful we are for every single day we get to spend with him." Maya didn't speak. She simply lay down beside Officer on his bed, her body curved against his, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a rhythm that seemed to contain all the love and loyalty and devotion that had ever existed between a girl and her dog. She whispered promises to him, promises that she would be there for him the way he had been there for her. Promises that she would help him through this, that she would love him unconditionally, that she would never abandon him no matter how difficult things became, no matter how much pain or struggle lay ahead. Officer's tail thumped softly against the mattress, a gentle acknowledgement of her promises, a quiet affirmation that he understood, that he accepted her commitment, that he was ready to face whatever came next with her by his side. He had protected her from invisible danger when she was vulnerable and unaware. Now she would protect him from the invisible enemy that was slowly stealing his strength, his mobility, his vitality. The real test of their bond was about to begin, and neither of them could have anticipated how this challenge would transform them both, or the profound lessons about love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of loyalty that lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, Maya would discover that caring for Officer wasn't just about managing his physical decline. It was about learning the deepest truths about what it means to love someone unconditionally, to stand by them through suffering, and to find meaning and purpose in the act of service and devotion. But first, she would have to face the hardest truth of all, that sometimes love means being willing to let go. The first week after Officer's diagnosis was a whirlwind of activity and emotional adjustment. David spent hours researching degenerative myelopathy online, reading scientific papers, watching videos of other dogs with DM, connecting with support groups for owners of dogs with the condition. He learned about physical therapy techniques, about the best supplements and medications, about assistive devices that could help extend Officer's mobility and independence. Susan began reorganizing the house to accommodate Officer's changing needs, removing obstacles, creating pathways that were easy for him to navigate, setting up a comfortable space on the ground floor so he wouldn't have to struggle with stairs. But it was Maya who took on the most important role. She became Officer's primary caregiver, his companion, his reason to keep fighting. Every morning, before school, Maya would wake up early and spend 30 minutes with Officer, gently massaging his legs to improve circulation and prevent muscle atrophy. She'd learned the techniques from a video recommended by Dr. Chen, and she performed them with the concentration of someone engaged in something sacred. She'd work her fingers along his muscles, feeling for knots and tension, talking to him softly the entire time, telling him about her day ahead, asking him about his dreams, sharing her hopes and fears. "We're going to get through this together, Officer," she'd whisper, her hands moving with practiced gentleness. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we have each other. And that's what matters. That's what's going to get us through." Officer would rest his head on the bed, his eyes half closed, and she could swear he understood every word. His tail would thump softly against the mattress, a response that Maya had learned to read as clearly as if he'd spoken. After school, Maya would rush home, desperate to see him, to check on him, to make sure he was comfortable. She'd help him outside to the bathroom, supporting his back end with a specially designed harness that her father had ordered online. She'd stay with him while he did his business, making sure he didn't fall, making sure he felt safe and supported. Then she'd bring him back inside and spend the evening with him, doing homework beside his bed, reading to him from her favorite books, simply being present with him. The physical decline was gradual but relentless. By the end of the first month, Officer's hind legs were significantly weaker. He could still walk short distances, but he tired quickly. His front legs began to show signs of weakness as well. His coordination deteriorated. Sometimes he'd stumble when trying to walk, his legs not responding quickly enough to prevent a fall. Each stumble seemed to wound Maya emotionally, as if she was witnessing pieces of Officer being stolen away, one by one. David installed ramps throughout the house, one from the back door into the yard, one to help Officer access his bed, one to help him get into the car for trips to the vet. Susan purchased a wheeled cart with a support sling that allowed Officer to use his front legs while his back legs rested in the cart. It looked like a small wheelchair designed for a dog, and when Officer first saw it, he seemed confused, almost offended by the contraption. But Maya understood. She got down on the floor with him, eye level, and explained it to him the way she'd explained something important to a friend. "This is going to help you, Officer," she said, her hand stroking his head. "It's not because you're weak. It's because I love you, and I want you to be able to keep moving, keep exploring, keep living your life. You taught me that love means doing whatever it takes to protect the people you care about. Well, this is me protecting you. This is me showing you how much you mean to me." Officer seemed to understand. Within a few days, he'd accepted the cart as part of his new reality. Maya would pull him around the house and yard in it, and his eyes would brighten with something that looked like joy. He was still mobile. He was still independent in his own way. He was still Officer. 2 months after the diagnosis, Maya started a journal. She called it Officer's Story, and she filled it with daily observations about his condition, his mood, his personality. She recorded the small victories. The day he managed to climb 3 steps on his own, the day he ate his entire meal without help, the day he seemed particularly alert and playful. She also recorded the difficult moments. The day he had an accident in the house and seemed ashamed. The day he couldn't get up and needed her to help him. The day she found him struggling and crying out in pain. But more than just recording the physical changes, Maya wrote about Officer's spirit. She wrote about the way he never seemed to give up, never seemed to lose hope. She wrote about how, even as his body weakened, his eyes remained bright with intelligence and love. She wrote about the lessons he was teaching her through his example. Lessons about courage, about perseverance, about finding joy and meaning even in the face of decline and loss. Officer teaches me every day what it means to be brave, she wrote in one entry. He doesn't complain about his condition. He doesn't feel sorry for himself. He just keeps going, keeps loving us, keeps being present. If a dog can face his own mortality with such grace and dignity, then I should be able to face my own challenges with the same strength. Her teachers noticed the change in Maya. She was quieter than before, more introspective, but also more mature. She seemed to have aged years in just a few months. When her English teacher asked her to write an essay about someone who inspired her, Maya wrote about Officer. She wrote about his heroism in saving her life, about his dignity in facing his illness, about the lessons he was teaching her through his example. Her teacher gave her an A+ and wrote in the margins, "This is the most moving piece of writing I've ever read from a student. Officer is clearly a remarkable being." The veterinary visits became more frequent. Every 2 weeks, Maya and her parents would take Officer to see Dr. Chen for checkups and adjustments to his medications. Dr. Chen seemed genuinely invested in Officer's well-being, and she always took time to talk with Maya about how she was coping with the situation. "You're doing an amazing job," Dr. Chen told her during one visit. "Officer is lucky to have you. A lot of dogs in his situation would have given up by now. But Officer is still fighting because he knows he has someone who loves him unconditionally." During the 3rd month after diagnosis, Officer had a setback. He developed an infection in his urinary tract, which caused him additional pain and discomfort. He seemed to retreat into himself, becoming less responsive, less interested in food or play. Maya was devastated. She'd read online about DM, and she knew that infections were common in dogs with the condition, that they could accelerate the progression of the disease. She sat with him for hours that day, her hand on his chest, monitoring his breathing, checking his temperature, watching for any sign that he was in distress. She didn't go to school. She called her teachers and explained the situation, and they excused her absence without question. This was more important than any test or assignment. This was about being present for the being she loved most in the world. Her parents found her that afternoon, still sitting beside Officer's bed, tears streaming down her face, but also speaking to him softly, telling him stories about their life together. "Do you remember when I first brought you home?" she was saying. "You were so confused. You didn't know what to do with all the space, all the freedom. You were used to kennels and commands and structure. But you learned to love this life. You learned to love us, and we learned to love you more than we ever thought possible." She paused, wiping her eyes. "I know you're suffering, officer. I know this is hard. But you're not alone. You've never been alone. You have me, and you have Mom and Dad. And we're going to be right here with you through all of this. I promise." Officer's eyes opened slightly, and his tail thumped once against the mattress. A weak response, but a response nonetheless. It was as if he was acknowledging her promise, accepting her commitment to stay by his side. The infection cleared up after a course of antibiotics, and Officer rallied somewhat. He wasn't back to where he'd been before the infection, but he was responsive again, alert again, present again. And Maya learned an important lesson: that recovery wasn't always about returning to a previous state. Sometimes recovery was simply about continuing forward, about finding new ways to live and love and be present, even in the face of ongoing decline. By the 4th month after diagnosis, Officer's condition had progressed significantly. He could no longer walk on his own. His back legs had become essentially paralyzed, and his front legs were weakening as well. He spent most of his time on his bed, though Maya would still pull him around the house in his cart several times a day, giving him a change of scenery, keeping him engaged with the world around him. His appetite had diminished, and he had to be hand-fed sometimes. Small bites of soft food that Maya would offer to him with patience and love. His breathing had become more labored. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night, seemingly disoriented or in pain. And Maya would be there immediately, comforting him, adjusting his position, making sure he was as comfortable as possible. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally. Caring for Officer was consuming her life, but she wouldn't have had it any other way. This was what love meant. This was what loyalty meant. This was what it meant to honor the debt she owed to the being who had saved her life. One evening, about 4.5 months after the diagnosis, Maya sat with her parents in the living room while Officer slept on his bed nearby. "I need to talk to you about something," David said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "Dr. Chen called today. She wanted to discuss Officer's prognosis and what might be coming." Maya felt her heart clench. She knew what this conversation was about. She'd been dreading it, but she'd also known it was inevitable. "What did she say?" Maya asked, her voice small. "She said that Officer's condition is progressing faster than she initially expected," Susan said gently. "She said that his quality of life is declining, and that soon we might need to make some difficult decisions about what's best for him." The words hung in the air, words that Maya understood but didn't want to accept. Decisions. What was best for him? These were euphemisms, and she knew it. They were talking about euthanasia. They were talking about ending Officer's suffering by ending his life. "No," Maya said, shaking her head vehemently. "No, we're not doing that. Officer still has time. He's still fighting. He's still—" "I know," David said, his own voice breaking. "I know, sweetheart. But we have to think about what Officer would want. We have to think about his suffering." "He's not suffering," Maya insisted. Though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Officer was in pain sometimes. She could see it in his eyes, could hear it in the way he cried out at night. "He's happy. He's still here with us, and that's what matters." But even as she spoke these words, Maya felt something shifting inside her. She was beginning to understand a truth that was almost too painful to contemplate. That sometimes, the most loving thing you could do for someone you loved was to let them go. In the weeks that followed, Maya would face the most difficult decision of her life, a choice that would test the limits of her love and force her to confront the deepest truths about what it means to truly care for another being. And in making that choice, she would discover the true meaning of sacrifice. The conversation with her parents that evening marked the beginning of a period of profound internal struggle for Maya. She couldn't sleep that night, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts about what it would mean to let Officer go. The next morning, Maya called Dr. Chen's office and asked for a private consultation. She needed to understand Officer's condition from the vet directly, without her parents filtering the information. Dr. Chen was honest with her. "Officer is in pain," she said quietly. "Based on his current rate of decline, I estimate he has 2 to 4 weeks remaining before his condition becomes critical. His respiratory function is beginning to be affected. Eventually, he'll experience more frequent episodes of pain and difficulty breathing." "What if we don't?" Maya couldn't finish the sentence. "Officer will continue to decline," Dr. Chen said gently. "But if we euthanize him, we're giving him a peaceful death, surrounded by people who love him, rather than forcing him to endure weeks of increasing pain. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is to help them leave with dignity." That evening, Maya called her parents into the living room. Officer was sleeping on his bed, his breathing shallow and labored. "I think we need to let him go," Maya said quietly. "I think that's what love means. I think that's what Officer would want." Susan pulled Maya into an embrace, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. They decided the procedure would take place the following Saturday, giving them 1 week to say goodbye. That week, Maya spent every moment with Officer. She read to him, played his favorite sounds, and told him stories about their time together. She wrote him a letter that she planned to read on his final day. Saturday morning arrived with a cold, gray sky. Dr. Chen came to their home at 10 a.m. Officer seemed to sense something significant was happening. His eyes tracked each family member's movement. Maya sat beside him and read her letter aloud, her voice trembling. "Officer, you've been the most important being in my life. You've taught me about courage and loyalty and unconditional love. You saved my life. But more than that, you've changed my life. Thank you for being my hero. Thank you for being my best friend." Officer's tail thumped softly, one last affirmation of their bond. Dr. Chen administered a sedative first, then the final medication. Officer's breathing slowed. His heartbeat, which Maya could feel beneath her hand, began to fade. And then, so gently that it was almost imperceptible, Officer's life came to an end. The room fell silent except for the sound of the family's grief. Maya kept her hand on Officer's chest, unable to accept that the being she loved most was gone. Her father wrapped his arms around her, and she collapsed against him, her body racked with sobs. 2 weeks later, the family went to the park where they'd walked together so many times. They brought Officer's ashes in a small wooden box. Each family member spoke about what Officer had meant to them, and then they scattered his ashes into the wind, watching as they drifted across the park, returning to the earth that Officer had loved so much. But Officer's story didn't end with his death. The lessons he'd taught Maya, the love he'd shown her, and the example he'd set would ripple outward, touching the lives of everyone around her in ways that would continue to unfold for years to come.